So today we are here at the 2016 Ohioana Book Festival at the Columbus Sheraton Hotel. This is Kraft, and I'm Andy Ross. And today our guest is Richard O. Jones. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So Richard, you are a true crime author and historian. You're the author of 2 books published on History Press, including your first book, Cincinnati Savage Seamstress, The Shocking Edith Klump Murder Scandal. But your latest book is The First Celebrity Killer in Southwest Ohio, The Strange Confessions of Alfred Knapp. Thank you for bringing them on the show today. So in addition to writing books, you also maintain the True Crime Historian blog and publish the $2 Terror series, which is novella-length ebooks. So I'm interested in your latest book, The First Celebrity Serial Killer in Southwest Ohio, which is about the strangler Alfred Knapp. Could you just tell me a little bit about that figure?
Well, I kind of grew up in Hamilton, so I knew about Alfred as soon as I got interested in local history.
Okay.
Because he was our first electric chair case in Butler County. And everybody kind of presumed that he was this big serial killer and had killed 5 women, and so I started looking into it, and I thought the story is not quite as simple and cut and dry as it seemed.
Right.
As I started getting into the research, back in those days, newspapers were very competitive, and there were a lot of them, and they all kind of struggled to get the upper hand on each other. So there was a lot of very florid, very storytelling styles of things going on. And because he confessed to killing people in Indianapolis and Cincinnati, the press came from all over the Midwest, and they descended on Hamilton, which was kind of a little, industrial town along the river there, north of Cincinnati. And I don't think they quite knew what to do with all these newspaper people.
Right.
And so they allowed access. And in fact, the day that he confessed all these murders, several newspapers painted the scene of there were too many reporters to fit into the jail, and so they took him to the sheriff's house next door and set him up in the dining room. So he had basically a press conference, with dozens of newspaper reporters from all around the Midwest, and he was sitting there. Some of them described him smoking a cigar and kicked back, like talking about these horrid murders as if he were talking about last night's baseball games or something like that. Yeah.
So it sounds like a very relaxed atmosphere for such a serious case.
Yeah, it was. I think Alfred certainly enjoyed the limelight, and I think that the Hamilton people didn't quite know what to do with it.
Okay.
So they allowed it to happen. Now, eventually, they put the kibosh on it. After his preliminary hearing, he came out of the courthouse, and they wanted to get some fresh pictures of him because they cleaned him up and everything. And so there's a chapter in the book that describes this scene where he's kind of like the cover boy, and everybody's kind of sucking up to him and telling him how good he looks and all this stuff. And somebody comes up with the bright idea of, why don't we get, because he was the strangler, right? Why don't we get a picture of him with his hands around some girl's neck?
My.
And they went so far as to round up somebody like a clerk or somebody in the sheriff's office to do that. But then the sheriff got wind of it, and he says no.
Yeah,
and after that, he kind of put the hammer down. But for the first week or so, he was all over the newspapers, all over the Midwest, and relished in the attention that he was getting. And so the more he talked, kind of the more outlandish his stories got.
Okay, so he truly was a celebrity. I'm surprised they could find a willing participant for the strangling photo.
Yeah, I am too. But
yeah, given his history. But you mentioned that there were a lot of sort of differing viewpoints in all these newspaper articles that were published. I assume you consulted some of these in your research for writing this. Is this correct?
I read about 12 different newspapers and their accounts of this case.
Did you have any trouble sort of sorting out what was fact and what was fiction?
Sometimes you did. For example, I mentioned the cigar thing. Right. Well, another newspaper story might have said, well, he never touched tobacco,
Okay.
But then another one says, well, he was smoking cigars, So you have to kind of look at them all and see which ones make sense. And sometimes it's just, if 2 or 3 say the same thing, then maybe that you're onto something, because they were so competitive that sometimes I think they did kind of go out of their way to publish things that might not have been exactly true. For example, I talk about in the book at one point, after he was in jail for a couple years, they came out with a story about his wife that he had been married to when they arrested him, giving up their baby, having the baby taken away from him. Well, if you do the math, she could not possibly have had his baby because he was safely ensconced in the Ohio penitentiary at the time that, so if you do the math, it's like that wasn't the Strangler's child.
So there was certainly some embellishment.
Yeah, there was a lot of embellishment. But the good part though is that I think that, and at least for my storytelling purposes, is that there was this really intense family drama going on around Alfred as well. One of his sisters and her husband are the ones who kind of tipped the police that this was going on, but there was another sister who was very protective of him. And so they kind of had a falling out over this. And of course, then they have a dramatic courthouse reunion. And then there's the man who defended him later became on to be a Hamilton County prosecutor, but he, even though it was kind of a cut and dry case, he really worked himself almost to death. He worked himself. He actually collapsed in the courtroom. It was so hot, and so there's a lot of drama in this. And the newspapers just played it for all it's worth, which really worked out well for me because I could go through, like I said, 12 different newspapers and read their accounts of it, and from those kind of piece together this very Shakespearean kind of drama.
Okay, that's very interesting. So you mentioned earlier that you grew up in Hamilton County. Hamilton, excuse me. Was this just a pretty prevalent thing where you grew up? Was this a well-known thing? How young did you hear about this?
Well, when you look into local history, his name is always out there, but nobody ever really told the story. And so that's why I got fascinated with it, because I'd always heard about, Alfred Knapp being the first electric chair case from Hamilton, but there were a lot of, I don't want to give too much away because I tell some stuff in the book that's not been out before, about the veracity of some of his stories, because he was only convicted of one crime, though he confessed to 4.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So
I'm sure there's more about that.
There's plenty more about that.
So I'd like to also talk a little bit about your book before that, Cincinnati's Savage Seamstress, the shocking Edith Klump murder scandal. Could you just tell us a little bit about Edith Klump?
Okay, this is kind of a story I stumbled on when I was doing, I worked for the Hamilton Journal-News in newspapers for 25 years, and I took a buyout in the fall of 2013 and was kind of looking around for something to do. Well, I had done some research, and I had Alfred Knapp written first.
Oh, wow.
And he was part of a bigger book that I was wanting to write about Hamilton murders. I was having a little bit of trouble selling it, so I had come across this one during my research, and so I pitched this to History Press, and they bought it first, actually.
Okay.
So that's kind of what happened. This was a 1958 case in which they state police found a dead body, a burned body on the shores of Lake Cowan, a state park in Clinton County, Ohio. And they traced it back to Cincinnati. There's a Cincinnati woman named Louise Bergen. And Louise Bergen was separated from her husband, and he was living with Edith Klump. And she was telling people that they were married, but they weren't.
Okay.
So quickly, they started doing lie detector tests on all these people, and this kind of lurid situation that they had. Edith didn't do well on her lie detector tests, and so they arrested her for murder, and she made a full confession.
Okay.
And gave it to her lawyer, and she kind of stuck to her story even with him. He wrote about it in his memoirs, and he said even she told this story and she stuck with it. Well, they gave her the death sentence.
Oh, wow.
And so shortly after that, she came up with an alternative story. And it took her attorney and the governor of Ohio several years to get it all straightened out.
Okay.
So we can leave that go at that, yeah.
Okay, sounds good. So I also wanted to talk briefly about your true crime historian blog. So your website is truecrimehistorian.com. I appreciate the straightforwardness of the URL. So just could you talk to me a little bit about what initially drew you into the field of true crime?
Well, I come from Hamilton, like I said, and I had done some historical research because we have a pretty good history of some pretty high-profile murders in Hamilton. Most notably, the James Rupert case in 1975, the Easter Massacre, where he shot 11 members of his family, and it still remains the largest single-incident family murder in American history. So I'd done some research on that and some other things in Hamilton, and so as I was taking stock when I left my newspaper job of what to do next, I liked history, and true crime seemed to be something that would sell a little bit better than like industrial history and things of that sort. So I kind of got into that. doing the books, I discovered that I actually was making more money off of speakers' fees than royalties. So I started doing podcasts at the first of this year, and putting them up on my website. So I do 2 shows a week of true crime, and basically the shtick is I go back. I'll follow a murder case from beginning to end, and then take all those newspaper articles and using their language, the language of the newspapers, craft a story between 30 to 60 minutes long, so I can tell the whole case.
And you're publishing those twice a week?
Twice a week, yeah.
Sounds like you're staying pretty busy then.
Yeah, it's pretty busy, yeah.
Is the way you approach those drastically different than the way you've approached your books? What are the sort of allowances of the podcast medium?
Because I'm doing 2 a week, I don't really spend as much, like with this, I really accumulate a lot of material and then go through and you figure out how to tell a story best. With the podcast, I'm pretty much relying on the reporters, of the day, because I'm using mostly their language. I'm not rewriting their stuff. I'm just editing stories together, to make a coherent and smooth narrative.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, so I'm not really writing it. I'm more editing all their stuff and putting it together. Whereas with these, I really kind of crunched a whole bunch of stuff and put together. For example, the case that's going to be I publish on Thursday and Sunday. The case that's coming up tomorrow took place in Pittsburgh. So mostly I followed the Pittsburgh newspapers, except when they captured her in Arizona. So I got the Phoenix newspaper to tell about that story.
So it sounds like you're chasing them all over.
Yeah, chasing them all over the country if I have to.
Okay. So have you got any plans for your next true crime book?
I have a couple of things I'm working on. Yeah, I have a contract on the table for another History Press book. And I'm also searching for a publisher for my Rupert book. I do have a book drafted about the Rupert case, but I think it's more, History Press does regional history books, but I think the Rupert case is big enough that I need more of a national publisher for that. So I'm kind of working on that now.
Okay,
and doing the podcast twice a week, that keeps me pretty busy.
No, I'm sure it does. I'm sure that keeps you very busy. Do you have a set process for actually sitting down and getting to start writing? Like, are you good about starting writing? I know a lot of authors struggle about actually sitting down and writing.
No. See, no? I don't believe in writer's block. I think if you got writer's block, you're just, making excuses for yourself because especially with the kind of stuff I'm doing, the material is out there. And I feel like if I'm not working, it's my own laziness. I can just sit down and start working on anything. Plus, being in the newspaper business for 25 years helps you with that because there's no such thing as writer's block in the newspaper business either.
Right. You're always going to churn those.
Yeah. So you just do it. I mean, not everything you do is going to be good. I mean, with my podcast, I've got 3 that I recorded, and then when I was done, I went, this really isn't interesting enough. So I just kind of canned them. And started over again.
So it sounds like you're sort of used to that hectic schedule.
Oh yeah. This is actually better though.
Yeah.
The daily deadline was killing me.
Oh yeah. No, I bet. Well, is there anything else you'd like to let the viewers know today?
Oh no, I'm having a great time here at the Ohioana Book Fair. This is my second year here. Yeah. I don't have a book coming out this year, so I probably won't be back next year. But hopefully, maybe after that, we'll work on it.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to seeing you again.
Well, thanks for having me.
So much.
Appreciate it.
For more information from my guests, visit www.crafttheshow.com. This is Doug Dangler. Until next time, be creative.